welcome back. In this video about percents, we are going to be looking at percents of a quantity. So to recap where we've been in lesson 1 and 2, we've talked about where you either have the quantities, and that could be the part or the whole, and then you're trying to find the percentage, find the percent. So in that case, our percent was the unknown, but we had either one of the parts or the whole. Something like Mr. Plaska has been teaching at Curtis for 5 years. Out of the 11 that he has been a teacher, what percent is this? And so we knew the quantities. The part was this 5 years, the whole was at 11, and we could then calculate that percent. So in this video, we are going to be looking at what if you know the percent and you know the whole, and so you want to know what is the quantity of that part. So that means if we were to say, like, Mr. Plaska has been teaching at Curtis for 25% of his career, he has been teaching for 11 years, how many years has he been at Curtis? So I don't know if those numbers are accurate, but it's roughly, no, it's like half. That's definitely not accurate, but that is the problem, one of the problem types. You know the percent, you know the whole, and then what is the quantity. In the third type, it is you know the quantity and you know the part, and you're looking for what is the whole. So in this scenario, you would say, like, Mr. Plaska has been teaching 25% of his career at Curtis. He has been at Curtis for 5 years. How long has he been a teacher? How long has he taught? And I apologize for those scribbles. But those are going to be our 3 main problem types that we look at, and then there's different variations on these, of course. And so if you are still feeling a little bit shaky on calculating percents and what exactly a percent is, I would go check out that other video. And then here we're going to be looking at, starting with, if we know the percent and we know the whole, can we find that part, the value of that part? And so here we go. So the first type of question that we'd be looking at for this one, where we know the percent and we know the whole, is a question like, what is 40% of 250? And so if we're thinking about this in terms of, I'm going to start visually here, we know this is the whole quantity, and if we look at that, that would be 100%. And we are looking for, we know that the value of that whole is 250, and we're trying to figure out what is 40% of that. So if this here is 40%, what is this value? And so you might think back to when we've worked with fractions and when we've done other multiplication problems, that when you hear that word of, that should tell you multiplication. And so if I were to rewrite or rephrase this question of what is 40% of 250, I know 40%, in my head I'm thinking lots of things, but 40% is equal to 40 over 100, because mathematically that's a little bit easier for me to deal with. I can manipulate that more than I could 40%. So I'm going to rewrite 40% of 250 as 40 out of 100, because that's the same value, of multiplication 250. And then depending on what your numbers are, you could go through and then simplify, or you could multiply. These ones look like they're going to be pretty friendly, but I'm still going to simplify by dividing by 10, and then I have 40 over 10, if I rewrite this, times 25. And I know 40 divided by 10 is 4, so as I go through and solve this, 4 times 25 is 100. So 40% of 25 is 100. And that's our answer. So that's one way that we could calculate that. And another way that we could calculate this is going back to that idea of unit rates. And so if we know that, I'm going to put this in a box over here. if we think about this in terms of a unit rate, if we know that 250 is 100%, because 100% of 250 is 250, then we can figure out, that's 100%, we could figure out what 1% is and then use that to calculate what 40% would be. And so this is going to be a better strategy when your percentage isn't something nice and round like a 40. If it was like 37 or other prime numbers, that would be the route that you could go. So 250 divided by 100. And I guess if you're wondering, like, why can we write it like that? I'm going to do my real quick sketch again. If we know that the whole value of this is 250, because that's our whole, and because we're dealing with percents, that means if we chop this into 100 parts, and we wanted to find out the value of one of those parts, we would have to do 250 divided by 100. And so when we do 250 divided by 100, I know that is the same, because everything gets less, 10, like one place value, one place on the place value chart for every 10, and this is 2 of them, so I can swoop it 2 places. So 1% is equal to 2.5, or 2.5. So in this little picture up here, each one of those 100 little pieces is 2.5, 2.5. And so now 40% is just going to be 40 of these units, and each one is 2.5. Well, 40 times 2 is 80, and 40 times a half is 20. So that is 100, which is what we got up top. So that is going to be the 2 best options. And really, either one works, and it's going to depend on your numbers and taking a moment to decide what's going to be my best one moving forward there. So that is when you know the percent, you know the total, and you're trying to figure out what is that portion, what is that quantity or that part. This next problem type is going to be finding the whole when given the percent and the quantity. So that would be something like the question says 5% of a whole is 45. What is the whole? And so before we just move right into calculations, I am going to just take a moment to do a quick little picture. And we know that this whole thing is going to be 100%, and that this piece right here represents 5%, and we know the value of that 5% is 45. So we have a couple different routes that we can go down here. We could go our unit rate, where we take what we know about 5% and use that to calculate 1%. And then we could use that to calculate 100%. Or we could look and see, kind of like when we were comparing quantities with ratios, I want to say, where if we consider this to be an equivalent ratio or an equivalent relationship, we know that 5 to 45, 5% is to 45, and we need 100% to some other value. And so 5 times 20 equals 100. And so if we want this relationship to remain constant, we would need to also multiply that by 20. And 45 times 20, 45 times 2 is 90, times 10 is 900. So the whole is going to be 900. Alternatively, if we know that 5% is 45, I could double that, and I know 10% is 90. And so this would be kind of like almost using the unit rate style, but instead using equivalent fractions or some equivalent, I don't know, just like some proportional relationships here. And so if we know 10% is 90, 100% is going to be 10 times that. So again, I'm thinking if this is another 5%, and that's 45, that means each 10% on here is going to be 90. So 10 of those 90s is going to be 900. So if we rewind over here to this unit rate side, if we know that 5% is 45, 5% is 45. To figure out what 1% is, I'm going to need to divide 45 by 5. And that 45 divided by 5 is 9. And then 1 times 100 is 100. So 9 times 100 is 900. So again, we've arrived at that same destination, but it all works out in that same way. We just keep on digging through using those proportional relationships.